But yeah, I agree. It should be just on one night. Maybe they should be banned. I don't see why everyone should have them.
I don't mind them being on one night. I would just like some sort of really painful punishment for people who let it off on a night that it isn't.
Yeah.
Like New Year's, they save them up for New Year's.
Yeah.
It's like, who buys that many fireworks
Well,
anyway?
tons of people do. Hugo Weaving, it was. Bianca Atlas joins us, acting manager for the New Zealand Companion Animal Council. Bianca, good afternoon.
Kia ora, how are you?
Kia ora, very well. So what aren't you looking forward to tonight? Can you tell us?
What aren't we looking forward to? Increased reports of lost and injured animals, reports of intentional cruelty. That's what we're really hoping won't happen. I've spoken to my colleague at the New Zealand Companion Animal Register earlier today, and apparently 1 in 4 of their lost pet listings since Saturday have mentioned fireworks. So it's definitely a problem with animals running away and getting lost.
Is there, do you think, Bianca, residual trauma for animals? Does it have a lasting emotional effect?
Well, yeah, I mean, animals have a strong emotional memory, just like humans. So if an animal has experienced a severe episode of distress, for example, the first time they ever heard or saw fireworks, then even a small one firework in the distance on a later date can be enough to trigger a severe emotional response in them. So, yeah, for sure.
Okay. Fireworks seem to scare some animals out of their wits, others not so much. Are they a bit like us in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, there's individual differences. I mean, some animals are just generally more relaxed or more nervous with or without fireworks. But, I mean, and some animals are unfazed by fireworks, but I'd probably argue that they're in the minority.
What would you like to see? Would you like to see a complete end to the sale of them outside big events? What's your position on it?
We don't have an official position, but I'd say that we'd support any measure that minimises harm to animals. I think, as one of your guests was saying just before, back when we were kids, we enjoyed fireworks, but I think now with increasing housing density and people letting them off on all nights of the week or throughout the year, you can't predict when it's going to happen. So I think just, if there's to be a ban, we'd probably support that. And in the meantime, we just encourage people to be considerate of animals and people that live around them.
All right, nice to talk with you, and let's hope it's a better result tonight from the fireworks. Thank you very much, Bianca. Bianca Atlas. A desperate disease requires a desperate remedy. That's the quote Guy Fawkes gave the world.
The guy I used to work with was Catholic, and his mother would never celebrate Guy Fawkes because she said it was an anti-Catholic festival.
Yeah. I know. And there are still questions remaining. How the plotters got their hands on so much gunpowder, 36 barrels, and how they moved that from a house to the cellar of the Houses of Parliament. It's never been fully explained.
No.
Very easy back then. There's I don't know, a quick story. We had Nelson's Column in Dublin, which was obviously celebrating a British rule. The IRA, someone blew her up, and then not one window cracked on O'Connell Street, and then the British Army tried to blow up the stump, and then all the windows crashed.
Like that.
Yeah. So they had access, and they knew what they were doing.
That's
That's an inside job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Crikey.
Alan McElroy, lovely to have you on the panel.
Thank you.
Come back again, won't you?
I'd love to.
And Catherine Robertson, nice to see you again, and in Auckland as well.
Indeed. Lovely to be here.
Thanks for your company, everybody, and Checkpoint is coming right up.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, New Zealand banks on notice. A review of the country's biggest banks might clear them of any widespread misconduct, but at the same time, it's issued a deadline to remove sales incentives for staff peddling bank products. Also tonight, Wellington's $1 million suburbs on the rise. A conservation group says Auckland Council should be secretly filming people who walk into closed parts of the Waitakere Ranges. And final campaigning is underway ahead of the US midterm elections. As the city prepares for an influx of more e-scooters, Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says bylaw changes may be needed to keep riders and pedestrians safe. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The country's banks have emerged largely unscathed from a regulatory review, but still have a long to-do list ahead of them. The review by the Financial Markets Authority and the Reserve Bank has found none of the widespread misconduct revealed in Australia, such as lying and charging dead people fees. However, the banks have been told to clean up sales and pay structures, train staff better, tighten systems and encourage whistleblowing. The Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr says while the country's banks aren't as bad as their parents, they can't be complacent.
In this place, it's complacency that is the enemy, and this review should make it very clear to the banks and their stakeholders that they need to take the opportunity now to build a much more sustainable world-class banking system and framework with regard to conduct and culture. Reserve
Bank Governor Adrian Orr. Wellington's mayor says he's committed to making sure homes in the city are affordable, even though the average house price has soared by 45% in 3 years. Figures released today by Quotable Value show that in suburbs usually considered affordable, like Tawa, Newlands and Paparangi, the average rose by more than 50%. Justin Lester says the council is working towards having more affordable housing.
We're doing that in the CBD, we're doing that with our social housing, and we're partnering with government to make sure that we see more Kiwi-built properties being built in Wellington. That's our commitment. It is good that the economy is strong, but we want to make sure that everyone has access to it and everybody still has the ability in Wellington to own their own home.
Justin Lester. 9 of the capital suburbs now have an average house price of $1 million, up from 3 in 2015. A former Auckland Presbyterian church leader jailed for indecent assault 6 years ago has been sentenced again for offending against a second victim. Leslie Gubb was sent to prison for 20 months in 2012 for sexually abusing a young girl over 6 years. In the Manukau District Court today, the 80-year-old got 3 months home detention for abusing a young teenager. Judge John Bursing said he had caused her immense pain.
I don't think anyone in court could not be affected by the impact that your offending has had on this young lady. She's now in her early 20s, but she is clearly still absolutely traumatised by what you did to her.
John Bursing. During sentencing, the court heard Gubb had disclosed further offending against 5 more victims while completing a rehabilitation program. A kauri campaigner says the Auckland Council needs to up its game to prevent kauri dying out in the Waitakere Ranges. An audit by a group of conservation organisations has found the council is not doing enough to prevent people going into the ranges despite extensive track closures. A spokesperson for the Waitakere Rahui team, Mel Barton, says it found tracks open that should have been closed and open tracks with inadequate biosecurity measures. Ms Barton says most West Aucklanders are making a big sacrifice by staying out of the forest.
I feel frustrated and angry that they're only making a token effort when, we're all giving up so much.
Mel Barton. The council says it takes the problem very seriously and is ramping up its efforts for the peak summer period. Queenstown's council office is expected to sit empty for the rest of the week because of a diesel spill nearby. The spill happened sometime over the weekend and staff noticed an odour as soon as they entered the building this morning. A council spokesperson says fuel had seeped down from a tank in the roof. The council office and the public library on the floor below were evacuated and staff are unlikely to return until next week, though the library may open sooner. The public are being directed to the Shotover Street office. Virgin Australia's decision to give war veterans priority boarding and public acknowledgement during in-flight announcements has been described as embarrassing and tokenistic. The airline's move, which echoes similar moves by US airlines, has had a lukewarm response from some veterans and politicians, while Qantas says it won't be following suit. The head of the Australian Defence Association, Neil James, describes it as a manifestation of American culture that's unlikely to translate well in Australia. He says there are other forms of service to the community, such as the police and ambulance officers. So would you actually start a queue of such announcements? It's 5 past 5.
To sport now, and the Black Caps bowler Tim Southee says New Zealand will have to work hard to rein in Pakistan when the two teams begin a 3-match ODI series on Thursday. Pakistan cruised to a 47-run T20 win today, wrapping up a 3-0 series whitewash. But Southee says the Black Caps have learnt from the defeats and will be working hard to halt Pakistan's momentum.
Yeah, we've got a number of changes that come in to the one-day side, and the guys that are around this T20 series, I'm sure, would have learnt from the 3 games that we've had in these conditions. So we're looking forward to the change in format and the learnings that we can take from this T20 series for the guys that were involved in it.
Tim Southee. Meanwhile, the White Ferns have made a positive start to their T20 World Cup campaign, beating Sri Lanka by 6 wickets in today's warm-up match in Antigua. And the Ferns, who chose to bowl first, took 18 overs to chase down a target of 98, losing just 4 wickets in the process. Maddie Green top scored with 36 not out, and Susie Bates made 34. New Zealand golfer Danny Lee slipped well off the pace in the final round of the latest PGA Tour event in Nevada. His 1 over par 72 dropped him from 14th to a tie for 41st. The tournament was won by American Bryson DeChambeau, Chambeau, I think is how you pronounce it, his 3rd PGA win in 10 weeks and the 4th this year. And that's the news.
Politics in a polarised America.
Barbed wire used properly can be a beautiful sight.
A new recording leaked.
I was seeking to factor in and balance inappropriate content.
The important news on Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, AMP's managing director on its planned big changes, including selling its life insurance business in New Zealand. How will this affect hundreds of thousands of clients? And after 10, wild swimming enthusiast Annette Lees on why many of us are deeply connected to the water. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula and the Central High Country. Fine apart from isolated showers. And the showers becoming confined to the west coast from Kaipara Harbour southwards tonight, then clearing tomorrow afternoon. South Taranaki to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, and Gisborne to Wairarapa. Fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine. Buller and Westland, occasional showers, mostly confined to southwestland tomorrow. Isolated afternoon showers inland further north. Fiordland, mostly cloudy with drizzle about the fjords. For Southland, fine, apart from showers about Stewart Island. However, cloud increasing everywhere tomorrow afternoon and patchy light rain developing. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers, clearing early tomorrow morning and becoming fine. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. And welcome to Checkpoint. The country's banks have been told to keep a closer eye on how staff deal with customers, but they've been cleared of any serious misconduct. An inquiry by the Financial Markets Authority and the Reserve Bank released today found a few cases of poor conduct by bank staff, but none of the widespread misconduct revealed in Australia, such as charging dead people fees and lying. But the authority's chief executive, Rob Everett, says banks have been slow to take bad staff behaviour seriously and need to improve the way they monitor it. And Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said a short time ago the government is keeping a close eye on the industry.
The findings are a concern to the government. We want a fair banking system that operates in the interest of all New Zealanders. We're of the view that banks do need to lift their game to be much better at identifying problems and risks early on and fixing them. Now, while the report identifies problems, unlike Australia, they don't appear to be quite as widespread. However, there are clearly weaknesses within bank systems and processes that have resulted in some instances of poor conduct, and as a result, customers have been worse off. This isn't good enough.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern there. Our reporter Katie Scotcher has more on the report's findings.
11 banks were investigated by the Financial Markets Authority and the Reserve Bank over 4 months. The inquiry has found a few instances of poor behaviour. Staff at one bank manipulated customer records to prevent customers receiving satisfaction surveys, and at another, a staff member excluded a customer's debt from a credit application to ensure it was approved. The Financial Markets Authority's Chief Executive, Rob Everett, says the review found the banks reacted in different ways to issues with their staff.
Some banks appear reactive at best to these issues and complacent at worst. Most banks are at an early stage of embedding the necessary focus on long-term customer outcomes. And what we mean when we talk about customer outcomes are customers receiving products and services that they understand and that they benefit from and can bear the risk and cost of on an ongoing basis.
The inquiry follows the Royal Commission into Misconduct in the banking, superannuation and financial services industry in Australia. The Commission found banks there cheated customers and lied to regulators. But unlike the Australian banks, none of their subsidiaries here were named and shamed in today's report. The Reserve Bank Governor, Adrian Orr, says while the findings show New Zealand banks are not as bad as their parents, they're not perfect.
In this place, it's complacency that is the enemy, and this review should make it very clear to the banks and their stakeholders that they need to take the opportunity now to build a much more sustainable world-class banking system and framework with regard to conduct and culture.
These customers in central Auckland say they're not without fault.
It's as boring as any other line you have to wait in.
I've been banking with ASB and RNZ, and they treat their customers very well. It's like when I enter the bank, there's always someone actually waiting for us.
Usually the tellers are very polite, but they're into the modern banking system, which doesn't suit me.
Yeah, quite good service once you get to the counter, but yeah, it's a long wait usually in the times that you can actually go to the bank because everyone else has those times as well.
But these customers say their bank's problems run far deeper than long queues.
I don't think any banks have your best interest at heart. I mean, they're out to make a buck like everyone.
I find they play their part by the book and give you the information that you need when you need it. That's relevant to you.
I think banks are interested in money rather than people, yes.
Regulators are now recommending banks invest in ways to identify and fix staff faults, make it easier for staff to blow the whistle on bad behaviour, and to remove sale-linked bonuses. Consumer NZ's Chief Executive Officer Sue Chetwin says removing staff bonuses for selling products, such as insurance deals, means bank workers can focus on their customers.
That will mean, hopefully, that consumers can trust the information that they're being given is what is going to be right for them, rather than what happens currently, is that the staff are incentivised to sell the products regardless of whether they will be of some benefit to the consumer or not.
Westpac Chief Executive and Chair of the Bankers Association, David McLean, says banks are yet to receive their individual report cards.
The whole industry, I think, will be taking the findings very seriously. We're very pleased the regulators haven't found systemic or widespread misconduct, but we do note that they are calling for improvement in many areas, and as an industry we're committed to fix those issues they've called out.
Local banks have been given until the end of March next year to report on what action they have taken. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher-Aho.
The Minister for Regional Economic Development, Shane Jones, who has previously called out banks for gouging, says while he accepts the report's findings, the scope was too narrow.
But the deeper question is this: if we do not arrest the flow of these excessive profits over to New Zealand and out of New Zealand over to Australia, then I predict that the social licence space of banks will be further eroded. Secondly, I just think it's time that the banks themselves realise that they've got an extravagantly privileged position in New Zealand, and they always know, as Michael Cullen gave them a guarantee during the period of time when the financial crisis impacted on New Zealand, and I just think they've taken that for granted. Rest assured, my campaign on behalf of the regions has not diminished, but I accept that this particular review did not find egregious cases of corruption, as seems to be the case in Australia, but we'll be able to look at it again when the Australian Royal Commission reports.
And are you saying that Grant Robertson and Chris Farfoy are on board with the direction you want to go in?
I've been very much upfront in my discussions with Grant and my discussions with Mr. Farfoy that there are a host of other deeper issues. Number one, to do with the structure of competitiveness. Number two, to do with what can the state and the Crown, this government, do to encourage the development of open banking, which is a feature of overseas economies. We should be looking at ways to reduce the cost of banking, the ease of banking, the spread of banking, and not just allowing the Aussie-owned banks to continue to spirit out $5.5 billion. ANZ, their profits have grown 200% over a relatively small number of years, and their staff numbers have been slashed by 20%. That might be good for the Aussie owners. It's not good for us Kiwis.
Shane Jones there, Minister for Regional Economic Development. Just when National thought it was landing a few well-aimed political blows on the government over kickboxer Carol Schrubeck's immigration saga, Jamie Lee Ross is back in the ring again and swinging. A new recording surfaced of a conversation between the expelled MP, National Party leader Simon Bridges, and his deputy Paula Bennett. In it, National's leadership apparently offered to keep quiet about alleged harassment by Jamie Lee Ross as long as he exits quietly.
I give you my 100% assurance that if you go with the statement along the lines we've talked about, I will never badmouth you in relation to this, privately, publicly, on background, off the record in any way. I will do everything within my power to keep the things we've talked about last week out of the public glare. I will do everything.
It's the unmistakable voice of Simon Bridges. The offer equally as clear. He'll keep stum about Jamie Lee Ross's alleged harassment of women as long as the MP plays along with National's pre-approved script.
So it would be for medical reasons.
If that's what you want, so I think either medical or family is the best option.
Medical's true.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's right.
That's right.
And
there's no shame in that.
No, and it means that everyone will back off you too, the media and all that sort of stuff, which I think is important.
Yet hours after the reassuring phone call from Paula Bennett and Simon Bridges, this about why his MP was stepping down.
For what are, as I say, personal, sensitive, perhaps embarrassing issues.
The phone call was recorded October 2nd. The question, was it a house call from two spin doctors trying to stop the National Party hemorrhaging publicly, or a genuine effort to soften the blow for an unwell MP?
Dude, you're pushing me over the edge here. I'm not well after Wednesday.
Either way, Deputy Paula Bennett hard sells what's described as the lightest possible way out for Jamie Lee Ross.
You've got to take it, man.
It's said several times, several different ways, but the essence is the same.
The stuff around harassing staff, which I reject, that is the worst, and I don't even know what that is.
Well, you do know what the disloyalty stuff is, and that's been put to you really clearly. And if that was put to caucus, that would be enough. You know, and so we are trying to give you the lightest possible way out of this.
Remember, it's alleged Jamie Lee Ross acted inappropriately toward a sitting MP and two parliamentary staffers. During the course of the conversation, the MP is offered cover. A comeback is also dangled in his direction.
We can get through it, and you can get through it, and you can come out the other side if your attitude after some time out is good and positive, and you can be promoted again.
Again, at the press conference hours later, Simon Bridges spoke of the whole situation, taking him by surprise.
I've got to be honest with you, how this came out of the blue. You think you know your colleagues very well, but you don't always know everything that's going on.
Yet the phone recording suggests Mr Bridges knew more than what he was saying. It's important to note Jamie Lee Ross was the only one of the trio who knew the conversation was being recorded.
The last few days have been pretty dark.
We want to help you, Jamie Lee. We really want to help you.
So, I'm broken at the moment.
I do want you to be crystal clear. You are not coming back to Wellington and caucus this year.
We're going to back you, mate. We're going to back you on this.
2 weeks and an allegation of electoral fraud later, all bets were off.
This is a guy who's lying, who's leaking, and he's now lashing out.
And everything about his behaviour, the lies, the leaks, and other matters as well are entirely unacceptable.
And today, this from Simon Bridges.
I got it right.
Checkpoint requested interviews with Simon Bridges, Paula Bennett and Judith Collins. We asked nicely, but they all declined. We also extended the invitation to anyone in National's caucus. There were no takers. National Party President Peter Goodfellow also declined to come on Checkpoint, saying he was too busy with party business. The number of million-dollar suburbs in Wellington has tripled in just 3 years. House price valuations were released today and show there are 9 suburbs in the city where the average house price is $1 million. In 2015, there were only 3. It's happened as house prices across the capital jump 45%. Wellington Issues reporter Laura Dooney filed this report.
Basking in the glorious sun Wellington's eastern suburbs are known for, Hataitai and its cluster of shops is near the airport, the sea and town. And for all that, the average price for a house there is now $1 million. Locals aren't that surprised.
Nothing surprises me in this climate, no.
No, I'm not at all surprised, in as much that it's such a great spot because it's close to the airport, close to all the beaches and close to town, so yeah, it's got lots going for it, really.
A little bit. I mean, I think Haitara is a great little suburb. It's somewhat interesting though, but I'm not overly surprised by it.
Haitara is just so convenient. It's just got, you can walk over the hill to the city. It's fairly eclectic, and you've got the Realm down there, which offers a fair bit and a few restaurants. So a bit going for it.
Kandala, Broadmeadows, Northland, Thorndon, Te Aro and Mount Victoria have also joined Kelburn, Seatoun and Oriental Bay in the $1 Million House Price Club. Quotable Value General Manager David Nagel says the higher values are representative of what has happened across the country.
We're seeing growth right around New Zealand. This is just following what's happening in other parts of New Zealand. Wellington were probably a little bit slow for the market to kick off compared to Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga.
He says some of the steepest hikes have been in areas considered affordable, such as Tawa, Newlands and Paparangi.
Where you've got competing forces with first home buyers, competing with investors for the same property, then that is going to drive value growth. And that is why we've seen the strongest growth at the more modest locations of the city, the more affordable suburbs.
The city's properties were valued by a quotable value for Wellington City Council, which is quick to point out an increase in the value of a home doesn't necessarily mean a big leap in rates. Its chief financial advisor, Andy Matthews, says the revaluation process is used to calculate how to spread rates.
If everybody's property goes up by the same value, the split's the same. So the valuations in themselves don't drive rates. We don't collect any more rates because property values go up. We simply use the rating valuations as a means of spreading the rates across ratepayers.
Mr Matthews says there will be a variation in some rates bills, and while the modelling hasn't been done, they should only increase by a few percent. The council has set a target for a 3.6% increase in rates in the next financial year. The city's mayor, Justin Lester, says the council remains committed to making sure the city has affordable housing.
We're doing that. We're doing that in the CBD, we're doing that with our social housing, and we're partnering with government to make sure that we see more Kiwi-built properties being built in Wellington. That's our commitment. It is good that the economy is strong, but we want to make sure that everyone has access to it and everybody still has the ability in Wellington to own their own home.
Mr Lester says there has also been an increase in supply in Wellington, with a record level of consents in the city over the past 3 years. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, ko Laura Dooney tēnei.
Final campaigning is underway in the US ahead of this week's midterm elections, which are being seen as a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency. Mr Trump has been on the stump at a rally in Georgia, while the former president, Barack Obama, is campaigning for the Democrats in Indiana. The BBC's Chris Buckler takes a closer look.
Donald Trump has been nothing but relentless in his campaigning. Georgia just the latest stop in a frantic week of rallies held in state after state after state. This is a president trying to defend his power and saying whatever he can to shore up his support. That means talking up the economy, but it also means talking tough on the subjects that divide this country, including immigration.
Turn back now, because you're not coming into the United States unless you go through the process. Turn back. So if you want more caravans and you want more crime, vote Democrat. It's very simple. If you want strong borders and safe communities, vote Republican.
Along America's southern border, the first of thousands of troops have already arrived to defend this country against what the president has called an invasion. He's talking about this caravan of migrants from Central America. They are still many weeks away from the US. This election, on the other hand, is only days away. And it's clear with this and issues like Iran, the president is trying to present a certain image. In Washington, Sunday was game day for American football fans, but they know the truly crucial contest will happen on Tuesday.
If we don't have a secure border, we don't have a secure country.
We just need to get the Republicans out.
If you don't like something, vote.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear any talk after.
It's too late then.
It's too late.
Yeah. But
it's a biggie.
As Barack Obama knows all too well, in the midterms, floating voters tend to favour the party that opposes the president. But Democrats are well aware that nothing feels certain in American politics anymore.
America's at a crossroads. The health care of millions is on the ballot. A fair shake for working families is on the ballot. Perhaps most importantly, the character of our country is on the ballot.
Hundreds of candidates are taking part in hundreds of elections across this country. But Donald Trump cast a shadow over all of those races. It's hard to see the midterms as anything but a referendum on his presidency.
Chris Buckler in Washington. Auckland Council should be secretly filming and cracking down on people who are going into closed parts of the Waitakere Ranges, says a conservation group. Most of the tracks in the ranges are supposed to be closed to stop the spread of the fatal Kodi dieback that threatens to wipe out the forest. But an audit by a local conservation group has discovered tracks that should be closed but are still open, tracks missing crucial biosecurity measures, and evidence that plenty of people are still going bush. Rowan Quinn and camera operator Claire Easton-Farrelly took a look at some examples with Kodi campaigner Mels Barton.
I just think, how long has it been standing there? You know, what has that tree seen change? How privileged are we to still have that here?
Just a few minutes from suburban West Auckland, lawns and pavements turn to forest, with ancient kauri dotted along shaded roadsides, the odd driveway disappearing up into the bush. This one is a particularly fine specimen, a trunk so wide the arms of any tree huggers would barely break into a curve.
It's probably, I don't know, it's probably over 1,000 years old, I'd say, that tree. It's enormous.
It's feeding a whole ecosystem up there as well.
It is a whole ecosystem up there. The birds and their epiphytes. It's a whole world depends upon that tree. Just that one tree.
The Waitakere Ranges have a wild heart but an urban fringe, and that's part of the challenge of curbing Kodi dieback. Mels Barton is on the community's front line as part of the conservation group, the Waitakere Rahui team. She has a special permit from the iwi, Te Kawarau Amaki, to enter the forest to carry out her work.
You're aiming for lickable clean.
Right, gotcha. Could eat my dinner off these.
Yeah.
And I think that's something a lot of people wouldn't realise, would they? Just the extent that you have to go to.
Just one tiny speck of soil's enough to spread Kodi dieback spores, so meticulous shoe scrubbing's a familiar routine for Mels and the 20 or so volunteers she's been working with to inspect every track covered by the Rahui.
Okay, how's that looking?
Yep, that's good.
Okay.
They found in the few tracks that were allowed to be open, there were often shortcomings in the biosecurity measures, like no signs or walk-through shoe cleaning stations. But they also found evidence of people skirting around obvious barriers or forming new makeshift tracks. Mel says that carries a maximum fine of $20,000 and the council's not making use of it.
Put some covert cameras on there, actually, you know, make some examples of people that are brazenly breaching this and publicise them.
The audit also found at least 14 tracks that should be closed but are not. There are no fences, no signs, nothing to indicate not to go in there. Tracks like this one, close to houses, and that 1,000-year-old Cody. It's a tiny track, but Mel says that shouldn't matter.
There's tree roots, there's debris, there's soil, there's mud. This is not a high-quality track. This is not up to standard.
There are homes and stuff here, so it's actually quite feasible that people could be coming in, right?
Oh, there's plenty of private properties along this road, so, you know, I'm sure they'll all be using this track. Yep, here. Yep. So, right, yep. Yep. So follow down here. Climb. Yep.
Across near Bethel's Beach, Te Henga is perhaps the most famous Waitakere track, the 70-kilometre long Hillary Trail. It's one that's allowed to be partially open, but you'd never know there were worries about Cody dieback here. There are no signs and no cleaning station. As summer approaches, Mel's and her volunteers are worried.
That people have forgotten, that they don't remember that the forest is closed, that they don't know how it is that they're supposed to behave. And, you know, the council needs to be out there in people's faces. We need to have big signs on the roads. We need to have a full-on marketing campaign.
The council says the Bethel's end of the Hillary Trail does not contain Cody, so it's not covered by its closure measures. It says at other places along the trail there is extensive info. Its manager of regional parks, Rachel Callagher, says the council does have a small number of cameras on the track network, and it was sizing up where to put more of a physical compliance presence.
At this stage, you know, we don't have any particular individuals that are lined up, but we're certainly seeing that there are some tracks where we've got more of an issue than others.
She says decisions about heavy-duty fines were in the hands of the Ministry for Primary Industries, although the council could prosecute people for trespass. Ms Callagher says the council was ramping up its efforts for summer. It had only had access to allocated Cody money since July, and it was challenging to police an area with 1 million visitors and 90 entrances.
The closures that we've got in place are unprecedented. We haven't closed anything of this scale anywhere else in New Zealand to deal with one of these types of problems.
The Waitakere Rahui team says it managed to carry out its audit with just 20 volunteers, and the council should be able to do so much more. It says every day lost is another day closer to losing the Cody, and with it the whole Waitakere's forest. I Tāmaki Makaurau mō Checkpoint, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Coming up, New Caledonians reject independence. Where will an extra 600 teaching support staff come from? And Auckland Mayor Phil Goff calls for a 10k an hour speed restriction for e-scooters on footpaths. We would love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 on the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But first, here's Anna Thomas with the headlines.
A former church leader jailed for indecently assaulting a young girl in 2012 has been sentenced again after another victim came forward. Leslie Gubb, who used to be a senior member of an Auckland Presbyterian church, appeared in the Manukau District Court this morning after pleading guilty to indecent assault. The 80-year-old had previously been jailed for 1 year and 8 months after admitting indecently assaulting another young girl more than 10 years ago. The courts heard that Gubb has also admitted sexual offending against more young people. Wellington's mayor says he's committed to making sure homes in the city are affordable, even though the average house price has soared by 45% in 3 years. Figures released today by Quotable Value show that in suburbs usually considered affordable, like Tawa, Newlands and Paparangi, the average rose by more than 50%. Justin Lester says the council is working towards having more affordable homes in the capital. A Kauri campaigner says the Auckland Council needs to up its game to prevent Kauri dying out in the Waitakere Ranges. An audit by a group of conservationists has found the council is not doing enough to prevent people going into the ranges despite extensive track closures. A spokesperson for the Waitakere Rahui team, Mel Spartan, says she feels frustrated and angry that the council's only making a token effort. The government says more research is needed before the Super Gold Card is upgraded. Grey Power wants the card to become an official form of identification with more information on it to prevent cases of fraud. But the Minister for Seniors, Tracy Martin, says while they want an upgrade, they're in no rush to turn it into a smart card. The United States sanctions against Iran's oil industry will be reimposed in a few hours' time following President Trump's decision earlier this year to pull out of the international nuclear deal with Iran. The US Secretary of State says the policy of economic pressure is already having an effect, with the Iranian currency falling in value. And that's the news.
Thanks, Anna. Time for some business news now. Nona Peltier joins us in the studio. Westpac, Nona, has joined the $1 billion Bank Profit Club. Try saying that quickly. So what was the result and how did they get there?
Well, look, they got there. The result was basically a cash profit of just over $1 billion, and looking at a net profit, which is the bottom line. So a cash profit is underlying, shows probably a little bit more about how the bank is actually doing. It was $936 million was the net profit. So still very, very high profit. And the reason? Well, they think it's because they've restructured to make themselves more accountable to customers, to improve their services and so on. And it seems to be paying off for them. So fair enough. That's what they had their home and business lending up 4%. And deposits up 6%, which is, you know, fairly substantial. And of course, debts were negligible. So that's been very positive for the bank overall.
Big numbers there. Trustpower's first half profit dropped. They've got the reverse scenario, and this is to do with the hydro lake levels?
Yes, that's right. So the hydro lake levels weren't what they were the year earlier. So their profit was $65 million for the 6 months ended in September, compared with $79 million the year before. But nevertheless, they had an asset sale through the period, and they're going to reward their shareholders with a bigger dividend. So there you go.
Okay, what happened in the markets today?
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Trustpower's share price rose 0.5% on that. So even though their profit was down, that's a gain of 3 cents. And Westpac was up 1.5%. So the market really liked those results. And that's quite substantial considering Asia is a sea of red today. And that's mostly because Wall Street was weaker. Our own market closed down, let's see, nearly 2/3%. 57 points to 8,779, and that's mostly because there's the U.S. economy is strong. Looks like there's going to be an interest rate rise there in December potentially, and the trade tensions are continue to persist. So our currency is mixed. We're slightly weaker against the U.S. cents, U.S. at 66.4 U.S. and 51.1 pence, and that's because the Brexit deal is looking positive again, as you know, the
ebb and flow.
Ebb and flow as it goes. And we're up against the Australian currency just a bit, 92.4 cents.
Great, thanks, Nona. France's President Emmanuel Macron says he is immensely proud that people in New Caledonia have rejected independence in a referendum. The Pacific Island has belonged to France for more than 150 years. The BBC's Gemma Coombe has the story.
This was a referendum decades in the making. It was promised as part of a peace deal following a violent campaign by separatists from the indigenous Kanak people. But although close to 57% of voters chose to remain a part of France, the yes voters are still celebrating.
The losers, the pro-independence side, regards this outcome as a victory. Roch Kwamitan, the leader of the FLNKS, came out and said that anything more than 40% was a victory, and they've achieved obviously 43%.
Independence has long been a goal of the Kanak people, who were dispossessed of their traditional lands in 1853 when the French took control. About 175,000 people were eligible to vote, and more than 80% did.
Do you know why I'm voting yes? For civil peace, for historical logic, the dignity of the Kanak people, the dignity of our Caledonian population. They agreed to let us vote. The Kanak people accepted this, so we need to give back to them a little.
French President Emmanuel Macron has welcomed the decision and says he has immense pride in those who voted to remain with France.
Le seul vaincu
The only loser is the temptation for disdain, division, violence, and fear. The only winner is the peace process, which has been driving New Caledonia for 30 years, the spirit of dialogue that nothing will underline anymore.
Not all is lost for the yes voters, though. The deal states that in the event of a no vote, 2 further referendums on independence can still be held before 2022.
There's Gemma Coombe reporting there. A former church leader jailed for indecently assaulting a young girl in 2012 has been sentenced a second time after a second victim came forward. Leslie Gubb, a senior member of an Auckland Presbyterian church, appeared in the Manukau District Court this morning after pleading guilty to a representative charge of indecent assault. The charge relates to the 80-year-old's second victim, and as the court heard, there might be 5 more out there. Our court reporter, Annika Smith, was there and filed this report. And a warning, some listeners may find some of the content of Annika's story disturbing.
Walking into the dock this morning, Gubb presented as an elderly man so frail he needed a walking stick to support himself. It was a stark contrast to the way his victim described him, as a horrible monster who had preyed on her nearly a decade ago. His victim, who was sexually abused by Gubb when she was aged between 14 and 16 years old, read her victim impact statement from behind a screen. Gubb had touched her on a number of occasions between 2007 and 2009, sometimes pulling her onto his lap. She wept as she told the court the pain he had caused her, damaging her innocence, making her feel hopeless, pathetic and ugly. She said the offending caused her to turn to alcohol and then self-harm, going on to try and take her own life 5 times. Judge Bergsing began his sentencing by acknowledging her courage.
I don't think anyone in court could not be affected by the impact that your offending has had on this young lady. She's now in her early 20s, but she is clearly still absolutely traumatised by what you did to her.
Gubb was jailed for 1 year and 8 months in 2012 after admitting 9 charges of indecent assault against a young girl between 2000 and 2006. Judge Bergsing said this case was similar in that the victim was young and vulnerable and there was a significant abuse of trust.
In sentencing today, there's nothing I can do which is going to fix what you have done. What I can do is express society's condemnation for this type of offending and impose a sentence which reflects that.
At sentencing today, Gubb's defence lawyer, Paul Borich QC, argued for permanent name suppression. He said his client had completed a safe rehabilitation program for sex offenders and resettled in a different community. More publicity would hinder Gubb's efforts to get his life back on track.
He's completed the sentence originally imposed, and it would seem a very good report in terms of his rehabilitation through the SAFE program. There's been no further offending, and it would seem that despite those handicaps, he's been able to successfully reintegrate himself into society.
The court heard Gubb had become involved with a new church since his move, but kept his past convictions secret until February this year, when the police approached his vicar. Police prosecutor Nikita Singh said it also emerged that the 80-year-old had disclosed further offending against 5 more victims during the SAFE program.
Information of these victims have not been provided formally to the police or disclosed to the police by the defendant. The victims have not made any formal complaint, and he is also currently working in a similar capacity at a church which contextualised the 2006 offending.
Judge Bergsing adopted a starting point of 14 months imprisonment and allowed discounts for Gubb's guilty plea and time already served. He imposed a final sentence of 3 months home detention with 6 months of special post-detention conditions. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
Teachers working in special education are taking a cautiously optimistic view of the government's plan to bring in 600 support staff. Yesterday, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern pledged $217 million on new staff to work with children with special learning needs from 2020. For some, it's a small step to taking the pressure off overburdened staff, but others fear the plans are murky and risk being a one-size-fits-all approach. Eva Corlett reports.
The principal of Berhampore School in Wellington, Mark Potter, is something of a trailblazer when it comes to teaching children with diverse needs. The school attracts children with autism, physical disability and more from across the city. Now 15% of its students need specialised education. But with more children needing targeted care across the country and fewer teachers to do it, the pressure is building. For Mr Potter, extra staff would be a huge help.
These new people being added into the workforce is going to make much more inclusive practices possible in schools. Be better support for schools, better support for teachers, better support for the relationship between parents and the staff working with the children.
The government plans to add more support coordinators into schools. They are responsible for getting children the right assistance and resources. Often a teacher will take on this coordination role on top of their job. Mr Potter says adding full-time specialist coordinators will free up teachers to teach. But he says the new staff will need to be paid properly.
You can't pay peanuts and expect to get anything other than performing monkeys. We really don't need that. What we need is some people who are going to be very highly specialised, and I'm picking these will be very experienced teachers as well, to actually support schools, parents and children. It's going to have to be a salary that will be attractive to getting people to take the job on and staying with the job.
Mr Potter says there is a challenge ahead as there is no specific training program for a coordinator. Shelley Peters is a special needs coordinator at James Hargest College in Invercargill. She says it's almost pointless paying for new coordinators when there isn't the staff to coordinate.
You're looking at a sector that is already in real strife. It's not growing. Young people aren't coming in. The workload issue is becoming more and more of a crisis when we're looking at the moderate and complex needs growing. And you've got teachers in the classroom trying to teach without necessarily the support in place to ensure that everyone's individual needs are catered to.
Other than more teachers, Ms Peters would like to see the health and education sectors working together so children don't end up in a bureaucratic merry-go-round. Autism NZ advocates for better education for those with autism. Its chief executive, Dane Dugan, agrees there needs to be a boots-on-the-ground approach.
It is really important that the focus of this role isn't on admin or isn't on anything else, that it is actually on teaching and actually helping teachers do the job.
Mr Dugan says it's important children get individualised care and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But ultimately, he's excited by the news.
From the government, they've certainly, I think, listened to the community about the need in this area. We feel like this is a positive move to try to put support around teachers, around schools, and then obviously around the families and children in the system to make sure that they get the school and environment they deserve. So firstly, it's pretty exciting. And I think both the Prime Minister and the Education Minister mentioned that yesterday themselves. There's still quite a lot of work to do in this area, but it's a good first step.
Mr Dugan says the sector could benefit from double the figures announced. There are 2,500 state or integrated primary and secondary schools, so there won't be a coordinator in every school. Their placement is likely to be decided on a ratio per number of students and the level of need. Mo te hota ko te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
Auckland's mayor wants tighter speed restrictions for e-scooters on footpaths. Last week, Phil Goff requested urgent advice around how to improve e-scooter safety after ACC received 66 claims in just 2.5 weeks. The urgent memo sent to councillors urged them not to crack down or regulate the scooters, but instead roll out an education campaign around safety. But as the city prepares for another 1,000 scooters to be rolled out this weekend, Mr Goff told me he'll be speaking to Auckland Transport about possible changes to the bylaw to cap speeds at 10 kilometres an hour on the city footpaths.
Look, the very first thing to do, and Auckland Transport and Auckland Council are commencing it today, is to start a safety awareness campaign, an education campaign, which is one step, but again, not enough in itself. But just to highlight the fact that these things aren't toys. Anything that can travel at 25 k's an hour is a vehicle and does put people at risk, both those riding them and those that they might come into contact with.
So how are you getting that message out? How are you getting that message out to sort of slow down?
There'll be a number of things. They'll be doing both an online and a poster campaign about things that people need to do when they're riding them, and we need to work, I think, with the rental agencies at the moment, Lime, but also Onzo and Wave that are introducing these hire scooters over the next few weeks. They have a responsibility. They've indicated that they want to work with us.
So do those providers? Sorry to interrupt, but do those providers, are they going to pay for this safety campaign? Are they?
They will be paying for elements of it. Whether we do, we have safety campaigns right across use of cars, bikes, pedestrians, etc. So the city itself has a responsibility in Auckland Transport. So,
but what will the split be? What do you reckon the split will be? Will they pay 50%, 80%?
Oh, look, I don't know. I haven't got into that detail, Lisa. But as I say, we need that sort of campaign. They need to be part of it. We need to be part of that. I also need to talk further with central government. I mean, I'm told that, strictly speaking, you can't ride scooters on cycleways because cycleways are confined to the use of cycles. Now, that's crazy. If you've got something that, like a motorised scooter that can do 25 k's an hour, if you've got a cycleway, it makes much more sense for them to be on the cycleway than on the footpath.
Will that require a law change?
Probably a regulatory change, but I need to have that discussion with the Minister.
And you're going to be pushing for it, though?
Yeah. I also want to take up my belief that if you're travelling on a footpath, 25 k's an hour is not a reasonable speed on a footpath. Maybe 10 k's an hour would be a more reasonable speed on a footpath. So I think that you need to have a regulatory environment that deals with that.
Okay, so a speed limit on the footpath, would that be a bylaw change?
That I'm checking out. My understanding is that may well be a New Zealand Transport Agency change, a regulatory change.
So how long would that take? How long would that take then to slap a speed limit on people zooming along on the footpath?
I think that there are some people that say, look, don't make your decisions prematurely. Let's see how the trial proceeds. Let's have a look at the thing in context. Let's not be too knee-jerk about it. Yeah, I understand that point of view, but I also believe that the injuries are happening now. We don't know yet whether they are disproportionate. I mean, I see ACC figures show that there were 6,000 ACC claims for push scooters last year, which is a bit mind-blowing, really. I wouldn't have thought they were anything like that.
So what is your time frame for this tightening things up?
I think there's a 3-month trial period, and what I'm saying is you don't need to wait to the end of that period to start to consider some sensible changes that might need to be made. Look, we're totally in favour of the scooters. We think it's a great way of getting around. Most people are using them responsibly. As I go out and I look around and I watch them, but not all. I'm equally aware you can't legislate for common sense, and if we did, we'd have a better community in every way for everyone.
Have you been on one of these things? Have you been on one of the scooters?
No, I haven't yet, and probably in the privacy of a side street, I'll have a go. Look, what I'm saying is I'm not against them being used. In fact, I'm quite positive about them. But let's balance the ease of getting around on these things with a sensible framework and the readiness of the police. Where people are seen to behave irresponsibly, there are already regulations in place where police could act.
But you're going to get another... You're getting another 1,000 of these on the weekend, aren't you, from a different provider? So another 1,000 electric scooters going into the mix.
Another 1,500 from both Onzo and Wave, and my understanding is that...
so that's over 2,000. That'll be over 2,000 on the streets of Auckland of these electric scooters.
You're talking about a lot of vehicles that are very popular, and that means that inevitably the accident rate will go up. What I need to understand, Lisa, is get ACC to analyse whether the per capita problem with this form of getting around is much higher than other relative forms of transport, whether it be
all of this, though, all of that talk of regulation change and checking in with ACC and the Transport Agency and all the rest of it, it sounds time-consuming. It sounds like it will take a while. And as I said, you're getting these extra scooters in this weekend. You're going to have more than 2,000 scooters zipping around Auckland without these provisions in place. Shouldn't you've got it sorted before you gave the thumbs up to the trial?
No, well, there's a whole lot of other things, but you're talking about skateboards and segways, etc., that have no regulatory framework. What's different with the scooters is that they're here in larger numbers. What I'm saying to you quite clearly is there's no reason to delay on an education and awareness campaign. There should be no reason to wait to the end of the trial before you decide that doing any speed on the footpath is okay. Patently, in my opinion, it is not. So there are some things that you can do quickly. There are some things that are common sense to do. What I don't want to look like I'm doing is just a knee-jerk reaction and I will ban them because they're new.
But the short version is you are going to crack down. Short version is you are going to crack down, though.
The short version is that we're looking at both an educational campaign and the need to constrain the speed these things can travel on a footpath. Most people, in my view and my observation, are behaving responsibly. Some aren't. And while you can't regulate for common sense, if we have got a framework in place that restricts speed and the police are prepared to respond to incidents where people are clearly behaving irresponsibly, and we have electronic records, I'm presuming, of where these things are going, who's riding them, and maybe even what speed they're doing, then maybe we just need, where people are behaving irresponsibly, to ask the police to be more active in cracking down on those incidents.
So you want the police to ticket scooter riders? That's what you're saying?
Where people, I don't care what they're, whether they're on a bike or whether they're on a scooter or whether they're on a skateboard, if they're behaving dangerously and putting other people at risk, yes, I would expect the people in charge of enforcing traffic rules to enforce it for scooters as well.
Grey Power wants the Super Gold Card to be upgraded to an official form of identification, a move it believes will prevent fraud. RNZ has revealed gold cards are being stolen, borrowed or counterfeited in order for people to use public transport for free. But the government is in no rush to fix the problem. Ben Strang reports.
You usually have to be over 65 to use the Super Gold Card, which gets you cheaper or even free public transport and discounted movie tickets and insurance, among other things. But some people have been taking advantage by borrowing, stealing or making counterfeit cards in order to reap the benefits. Grey Power Treasurer Roy Reid says the group has concerns about Gold Card fraud and believes it should have been made an official ID a long time ago.
Grey Power's been pushing for quite a number of years to have a person's photograph on the gold card so that then becomes a legal form of identification. There's a lot of older people who no longer have a driver's licence or a passport.
It's a move that is backed by Auckland Transport, which had its own concerns about gold card fraud before introducing its hop card system in 2016.
I think that's a tremendous initiative, and it would certainly help facilitate that and reduce fraud in regions that don't have sophisticated ticketing systems like ourselves.
The government, though, is hesitant to change the card too much too fast. The Labour Party and New Zealand First have committed to introducing a new generation of the Super Gold Card as part of their coalition agreement. They've talked about introducing a smart card, which could feature a microchip and the user's photograph, which the Ministry of Social Development says would cut cases of fraud. The Minister for Seniors, Tracy Martin, says the government is considering its options, but is in no rush to push through any changes.
About it being, a primary form of identification, that would be quite a significant shift in the card itself. If and when we were to smarten it up, there would have to be, because of levels of security, we'd have to change legislation for the first instance. We would have to deal with a lot of levels around security and privacy. So those are big issues. We are talking about them, but they're a wee way down the track.
Nearly 750,000 people have a gold card. The number is expected to hit 1 million by 2030. The Ministry of Social Development says 300,000 users have smartphones, And Ms Martin says one change could be the introduction of a Gold Card app. She says concerns around the misuse of the card have been raised with her in the past.
I've had anecdotal stories told to me as well over the years with regard to the Gold Card. I think fraud's probably a bit of a strong word to use. I would probably term it misuse. I've never seen any actual evidence of it, but it has been raised with me anecdotally.
The Ministry of Social Development has been informed of 3 cases of Gold Card fraud dating back to 2012, but admits it doesn't know the real extent of Gold Card fraud. Users can add a photo to their Gold Card for free by visiting their local AA. For Checkpoint, Ben Strang.
Time for some of your feedback now. Our earlier story about e-scooters, we talked to the Mayor, Phil Goff, Mayor of Auckland, about whether he's going to bring in some safety restrictions. He's looking at a 10k speed limit on the footpath for these Lime scooters. This person is saying to us that 5k's, Grant reckons 5k's an hour is what is acceptable on the footpath. 10k's too fast. Another one here on the matter of electric scooters. Why should they be allowed on footpaths at all when bicycles aren't? It seems highly inconsistent, Nathan said. And about policing that, who's going to do it, says Michael.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Regional Development Minister Shane Jones says the country's major banks shouldn't be let off the hook just because a review has cleared the sector of any serious misconduct. The inquiry by the Financial Markets Authority and Reserve Bank identified some poor conduct by bank staff, but not of the problems revealed in Australia. Mr Jones, who has previously criticised the banks for closing down local branches, says there are still big questions about the sector's competitiveness and whether banks are taking too much profits.
I just think it's time that the banks themselves realise that they've got an extravagantly privileged position in New Zealand. If we do not arrest the flow of these excessive profits out of New Zealand over to Australia, then I predict that the social licence space of banks will be further eroded.
Shane Jones. And the Prime Minister says some of the findings released today are of concern to the government and it's keeping a close eye on the sector.
We're of the view that banks do need to lift their game to be much better at identifying problems and risks early on and fixing them.
Jacinda Ardern says there is already legislation before the House to ensure the financial sector is sound, but she's not ruling out further change in the future. A Christchurch doctor says she's disturbed women are illegally importing abortion medicines they bought online. It's been revealed that last year MedSafe seized 39 packages containing the non-surgical abortion pills mifepristone and misoprostol at the border. Pippa Mackay, who's a certifying consultant and abortion provider, says taking the medicines without proper medical advice can lead to serious complications. She says the current process of obtaining an abortion could be too much for some women and liberalisation of the law would help.
I'm sure that that it would change things. I suspect people feeling they have to go through our current law may be a disincentive, or they may feel that their doctor or someone around is not going to be supportive to them obtaining one.
Pippa Mackay. The Law Commission has presented the Justice Minister with 3 options for taking abortion out of the Crimes Act. The Auckland Council says some of the criticism levelled at it over kauri dieback in the Waitakere Ranges is unfair. Shortcomings in the council's management of track closures aimed at preventing kauri dieback have been highlighted in an audit by conservation groups. The council has set aside $100 million to fight the disease across the region over 10 years, and its regional parks manager Rachel Kelleher says it's taking the threat seriously.
We're at the very start of that 10-year program, so that money only came across to us in July, and so you can imagine that between July and November, we've been doing a lot of work around planning the forward work program moving forwards.
Rachel Kelleher says the council plans to ramp up its response for the busy summer period. Job prospects for young people on the West Coast are expected to be boosted by a new native tree planting project. 179,000 native trees will be added to the Punakaiki area in the next 3 years, and one of 2 projects announced today by the Economic Development Minister and the Conservation Minister. School leavers and unemployed youth will help to plant the trees, and the Grey District Mayor Tony Cockshorn says it's a great way of keeping young people in the region.
That's good because it's extremely hard for us here on the West Coast to keep our young people here. We tend to export our kids. So any opportunity for our youngsters leaving school is a great opportunity. It's a worthy cause, so it's welcome with open arms.
Tony Cogshawn says work is already underway on a walkway and cycle track in the same area, which is popular with tourists. The Dunedin City Council is calling for feedback on a proposal to turn several blocks of free car parking spaces into metered spaces. Car parking has become a contentious issue in the central city in recent years, with anti-cyclist sentiment fuelled by the perception that cycleways are eating into parking space. The council has proposed extending its charged car parking zone 2 blocks north of the city centre, where free parks currently exist, and into Vogel Street in the Heritage Precinct. A spokesperson, Nick Sargent, says the proposal is based on a resident survey and designed to encourage parking turnover. Feedback closes on November the 23rd. It's at 6:05. To cricket, and attention now turns to the 50-over format for the Black Caps, who have proved unable to stop Pakistan's T20 run. The Pakistanis swept the 3-match series with a 47-run win in Dubai this morning. They've won 11 T20 series in a row and are on a 13-match winning streak. New Zealand skipper Kane Williamson is hoping his side will be more competitive in the one-day series.
Yeah, it's exciting. Obviously, a shame to go 3-0 down in this series. A lot of positives over the 3 games. Today was a tough pill to swallow, but a lot to learn from. So it is important we try and touch on those going into the one-day series.
Kane Williamson, and the first one-day is on Thursday morning. In rugby league, Kiwis prop Jared Waerea-Hargreaves is looking for his forwards to step up as they prepare for the 3rd test against England in Leeds next week. The New Zealanders were outmuscled after half-time in the 2nd test, the English running in 3 tries to turn a 6-all scoreline at the break into a 2014 win in Liverpool. Waerea-Hargreaves says the Kiwis will need more out front if they want to win after back-to-back losses to England.
Sort of who wins that middle third to I guess, take the next step forward and get on the ad line. So it was very physical early on, definitely feeling it, but yeah, we'll get ready for a nice physical game again next week.
Jared Waerea-Hargreaves, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dr. Cor Vink on using sex pheromones to keep redback spiders out of New Zealand. Penny Miles looks back on the weekend sport. And in the run-up to the midterm elections, a window on the murky world of US politics.
There's no actual or real verification done by election officials once they get that form to make sure that, for example, it's a real person.
Join me, Brian Crump, from After the News at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula and the Central High Country. Fine, apart from isolated showers becoming confined to the west coast from Kaipara Harbour southwards tonight and then clearing tomorrow afternoon. South Taranaki to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, and Gisborne to Wairarapa. Fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine weather for you. Buller and Westland, occasional showers, mostly confined to southwestland tomorrow. Isolated afternoon showers inland further north. For Fiordland, mostly cloudy with drizzle about the fjords. Southland, fine, apart from showers about Stewart Island. However, cloud increasing everywhere tomorrow afternoon and patchy light rain developing. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers clearing early tomorrow morning and becoming fine. RNZ National, it's coming up to 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. And the Prime Minister says some of the findings on New Zealand banks and the impact on their customers are of concern to the government. A review by the Financial Markets Authority and the Reserve Bank found a small amount of poor conduct by bank staff, but none of the widespread misconduct revealed in Australia, such as charging dead people fees and lying. However, the regulators are telling banks to clean up sales and pay structures, train staff better, tighten up systems and encourage whistleblowing. Jacinda Ardern says the government is keeping a close eye on the industry.
The findings are a concern to the government. We want a fair banking system that operates in the interest of all New Zealanders. We're of the view that banks do need to lift their game to be much better at identifying problems and risks early on and fixing them. Now, while the report identifies problems, unlike Australia, they don't appear to be quite as widespread. However, there are clearly weaknesses within bank systems and processes that have resulted in some instances of poor conduct, and as a result, customers have been worse off. This isn't good enough.
Jacinta Ardern says there's already legislation before the House to ensure the financial industry in New Zealand is sound, but is not ruling out further change in the future. The Conduct and Culture Review recommends that banks stop giving staff financial incentives for selling bank products to customers, with more emphasis needed on whether what they're selling is actually best for the customer in the long run. The Banking Association says all 17 of its members are on board with the recommendation. I asked the Acting Chief Executive, Anthony Constable, what grade he'd give the banks based on the report findings.
I would say it's a could do better in terms of working on our processes and picking up the pace on getting those things addressed.
One of the issues that was raised is incentivising staff to sell products. So how many of the banks that you represent offer incentives to staff for selling products to customers?
I can't comment on the number, but what I can say is that
why not?
Banks,
do you know how many do?
I would say that the vast majority do. And what I can say is that our banks are alive to this issue and have already started work on this and are removing, in terms of removing frontline incentives. And in fact, a lot of them are well down the track, and we've seen some recently have removed sales targets for customer-facing staff already.
Okay, so can you tell me what number of the banks that you represent are still offering incentives for staff to sell products to bank customers?
We're not privy to that information.
Okay.
But what I can say is that we're addressing this as an industry, and we're looking to work with the regulators and report back by March 2019. I would like to say that this report is also sort of highlighted that there's no widespread, misconduct or abuses out there, and I think that's a testament actually to our 25,000 staff. They've been doing the right thing by their customers.
That said, it does identify an issue with this particular area. So I'm wondering, how much do staff get paid when they sell a product to a bank customer? How does it work?
Again, I don't have that information in an association. We're not privy to that. But what we are doing is, addressing that. We've already started the work in terms of reviewing staff incentives, and as I say, in some cases that's already been addressed by removing sales targets for frontline staff.
So
we admit that there's work to be done, and we need to pick up the pace.
So in light of this report and concerns raised about this particular issue, how many of the banks that you represent are committed to getting rid of these sales targets altogether? How many have said, OK, yes, we'll do it, and we'll do it by March of next year?
All of our banks have committed to that, and we accept all the recommendations, and we're going to be acting urgently to address those.
Within that time frame?
I can absolutely confirm that they'll be working to that time frame and will achieve that, yes.
The other issue that was raised was insufficient safeguards, to protect against conduct issues, and that you're not proactively identifying problems as an industry. You're waiting for customers to complain. What do you think that says about your culture?
We acknowledge that there is work to be done on those issues, but what we can say is that there haven't been any widespread misconduct issues identified, and we think that's actually down to our staff doing the right thing by their customers. They know what's right and wrong.
But there's not a consistency across the board. Some banks are performing better than others. So how can customers have confidence when there are those issues?
I think New Zealanders can take confidence from this report because there's been no widespread misconduct or abuses reported. And again, our staff are acting in the best interest of their customers. This is about community and customer expectations, and this is going over and above obligations, at law. This is asking questions such as, should we, not can we.
Are you minimising the things that have been identified though? Although you're right and there are no widespread problems, there are some issues raised, and some of them are no long-term tracking of whether products sold to the customers are right for the customers. Do you not think that raises questions about whether your primary concern is the customer?
We absolutely acknowledge that there is work to be done, and we are treating this as an utmost priority as an industry, and we'll be working with the regulators, and we have been working. I mean, this has been a pretty robust and thorough review carried out by the regulators. I think they've put in about 14,000 hours of work. They've travelled the length and breadth of the country to, speak to our staff. We commend the work that they've put in, and we'll be addressing these issues in the timeframes that they've requested.
Some serious issues were identified, although they were confined to a small group of people. Inappropriate lending was one of them, manipulation of customer records and branch records. What banks was that happening in?
We don't have that information.
Why not? That's pretty serious stuff, isn't it? You'd want to know which bank it was.
So as an association, we're not privy to that information, but we understand that the regulators will be writing to the banks individually with work programs and discussing their individual reviews.
So how many banks was that kind of behaviour confined to in terms of your membership?
Again, I can't comment on individual banks and the findings. There were 11 retail banks involved in this very thorough and robust review, and they'll be hearing and working with the regulators, over the next few months.
But when you're coming out and saying there's no widespread problems and that all your members are committing to making things better for the customers, and you don't know which ones were involved in some serious behaviour, don't you want to know? Again,
we're not privy to that information. We are pleased to see that there has been no widespread misconduct or abuses reported, and I think that points to great work from bank staff in doing the right thing by their customers. We acknowledge that there is work to be done, and we are treating this as an utmost urgent matter, and we'll be working with the regulators.
The drip feeding of secretly taped phone conversations designed to damage National's leader continues with the release of a conversation between the party leadership and former MP Jamie Lee Ross. The 18-minute-long recording from early October is a discussion between leader Simon Bridges, Deputy Paula Bennett and Mr Ross, who was still a National MP. They were discussing the statement Mr Ross made at the start of October, that he was taking leave from Parliament on medical grounds for a few months. The recording shows he was being strongly urged to leave Parliament until at least next year, after being confronted with allegations of inappropriate conduct towards 4 or 5 women and disloyal behaviour towards Mr Bridges as leader. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Mr Ross, now an independent MP, remains away from Parliament on medical leave after a dramatic fallout with National colleagues, including Mr Bridges. The recording obtained by RNZ sheds light on some of the circumstances leading up to recent events and his resignation from the caucus. Mr Bridges and Mrs Bennett were strongly urging Mr Ross to take several months' leave. He made it clear to them that mentally he was in a very dark place. In the tape, Mr Bridges told Mr Ross he could potentially return next year, but there were still risks.
Actually, there's downsides in me letting you on with what you've done, okay? So I just want you to understand it. But if you take the statement for you and your behaviour subsequently is good, I will never refer to the matters we've talked about on Wednesday, Thursday again.
Paula Bennett told Mr Ross taking leave was the best option.
We're giving you just such the lightest option we possibly can in the light of what we've got in front of us.
You haven't even told me what I've supposedly done.
Well, I don't even know. All about the disloyalty stuff, Jamie Lee, and quite frankly, if that was put to caucus, that would be enough.
The stuff around harassing staff, which I reject, that is the worst, and I don't even know what that is.
Well, you do know what the disloyalty stuff is, and that's been put to you really clearly, and if that was put to caucus, that would be enough.
Mr Ross did not want to put a time frame on his medical leave to give him the option of returning before the end of the year.
Can we just not put a time on it in terms of public? We can have an agreement between us, but can we just say it's unspecified? it would be a matter of likely months, but not specify anything around that?
Can we say a few months? I mean, I want you to be clear, Jamie Lee. I'm not accepting this year. It's not happening, okay? And it is because it's about, whilst I'll never refer to it, the poor conduct I see in you and my loss of confidence in you and a need for us to work through that and time can heal that. And also because I think it's about you.
Speaking today, Simon Bridges said they were dealing with behaviour from Mr Ross he'd only recently become aware of that had nothing to do with the leak investigation.
About a week before this conversation, I put those matters to him in terms of inappropriate conduct I'd only just learnt of, and similarly disloyal, disruptive conduct. Then on the basis of medical specialist advice, we took some time and then Jamie Lee Ross telephoned, and that's you're hearing snippets of that conversation.
And he says there was no attempt to cover up the actions of his then MP.
What it is a complex, serious situation where I was seeking to factor in and balance inappropriate conduct, disruptive conduct, but also very serious health issues in the best way I could, and I think we got it right.
Jamie Lee Ross wrote to the National Party whip last week saying he was still on leave on medical advice and asking National to take his proxy vote, which it declined to do. It appears the National Party won't be taking any action such as trying to invoke the party-hopping legislation to force him out of Parliament, but will just respond to each leaked recording or text exchange as and when they happen. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
People have been illegally importing medical abortion kits despite terminations being legal in New Zealand. As Susan Strongman reports, one doctor is warning women are putting themselves at risk by taking drugs bought online.
Last year, 39 packages containing mifepristone and or misoprostol were seized at the border by medicine regulator MedSafe. The pills are used for non-surgical abortions but can only be prescribed in New Zealand with the approval of 2 certifying consultants. Christchurch doctor and abortion provider Dr. Pippa Mackay says the imports are concerning as it's unsafe to take abortion pills alone and without medical advice.
And I guess the other thing is, the abortion is legal in New Zealand, and I'm disturbed that people feel they have to resort to an illegal way to get a service that is available here.
Dr. Mackay says though 39 is a relatively small number of imports, others probably came into the country undetected.
We're talking about the numbers of pills that have been discovered, and I don't doubt there are some that haven't.
Dr. Mackay believes if abortion law is liberalised in New Zealand, people will be less likely to import the medicines.
I'm sure that it would change things. I suspect people feeling they have to go through our current law may be a disincentive, or they may feel that their doctor or someone around is not going to be supportive to them obtaining one. I think that taking our abortion framework out of, into a non-criminal event would be much better in terms of hopefully stopping this and women feeling they can access abortion more readily.
Abortion is currently treated as a justice rather than a health issue. But late last month, the Law Commission presented Justice Minister Andrew Little with 3 options for taking abortion out of the Crimes Act. The alternative approaches include no statutory test for an abortion to take place, a statutory test performed by one health practitioner, and a statutory test performed only after 22 weeks of pregnancy. Olran's Abortion Rights Aotearoa President Terry Ballamack hopes liberalisation of abortion law will mean that GPs are able to prescribe abortion medicines. She says this will make it easier for women, especially those in rural areas, who currently have to travel to main centres to access abortion services. It could also make the process cheaper for those not covered by the public health system.
The DHBs do pay for abortions, so it's not, it's not like you have to pay for it like in, say, the U.S. Still, it's really difficult to access because you have to, take days off work. You have to take days off in order to get all your bloods and your swabs and your ultrasound and the whole 9 yards. It ends up being quite a thing. So, it ends up being quite difficult for people in rural areas to access abortion. So I'm not entirely surprised that people would resort to this. Also, people who are not covered under the health service, they would be faced with, going private, which can cost anywhere from like $900 to $2,500.
A recent study in the United States found that the medications bought online cost between $160 and $540 and were manufactured in India. The president of pro-life group Voice for Life, Jackie de Ruyter, says the liberalisation of abortion law won't stop the illegal importation of the medicines.
I mean, like any woman wanting an abortion can do so very easily, and there are many medical abortions each year where they go to family planning or whatever to get the pill. So I see no reason why women would need to do that.
Jackie de Ruyter says women may be importing abortion kits because they are wanting to keep their pregnancies secret.
The only reason why women would be wanting to access this is because they don't want people to know what they're doing. You know, like they've found they're in a crisis situation, and the idea of continuing a pregnancy is just too much for them, and so they're looking for that quick, easy fix. And but so often, you know, that they think it's a quick, easy fix, and it's just a start for a lot of problems for many women.
The seizure of the abortion kits was part of Operation Pangea, a global crackdown on the trade of illicit medicines led by Interpol. Globally, 500 tonnes of medicine was seized. For Checkpoint, Susan Strongman.
A huge influx of new residents and spending is set to boost the communities near the Ohakea Defence Base. More than $2 billion is being spent on replacing the old Orion planes with 4 new P-8 Poseidons, and with that comes more people and infrastructure. Our Defence reporter Jonathan Mitchell has more.
Head north from Palmerston North and the city streets and buildings soon open up onto green paddocks as far as the eye can see. New Zealand defence country with overhead planes, a big runway and the letters Base Ohakea. Documents released to RNZ show moving number 5 squadron from Whenuapai to Ohakea, along with the 4 new planes, could result in several hundred personnel and their families shifting between 2022 and 2023. And that gives the locals a reason to smile. Just a few kilometres from the base is Bulls. Local cafe owner Jamie Simpson says the population boost is needed.
We need as many people around here as we can get, build the economy.
And why is that? What's the economy like at the moment?
I think it's probably pretty quiet at the moment compared to the last few years. So if we could get some more people in here, it'll be good.
So it can't come soon enough?
Yeah, yep.
And Indian food shop owner Balam Singh can't wait to get the extra people through his doors. What's it like to live here? Is it a good place?
Yes, good. I'm also here 8 or 9 years. Also boost here. But here open just restaurant 2.5 years and before cross the road for takeaway. Yeah.
And everyone needs to eat?
Yes, please. Yeah.
There's a big market in food?
Yes, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So what's the atmosphere like here? Are people excited about getting more people at the base?
Yeah, big plans. People enjoy here.
Do you like planes?
Yeah, yeah. Maybe last 2 years for lots of people for here, Air Force, which festival I forget. Lots of people for here inside for Air Force.
The base is expanding to include a hangar, office space, operations and training centres, along with upgrades to existing taxiways. It's forecast that more than 2,000 jobs will be sustained during the construction phase. All that is expected to be covered in the $2.3 billion budget. Local mayors are assessing what all that development means for them. Rangatiki Mayor Andy Watson says more houses will be needed, and his council is looking at incentives to make that happen, including a rates remission.
For every household that moves into our district, it alleviates the rating pressure. Our district is enormous. It's one of the largest in the country. Half of our budget goes in roading. So the more people that we have, it helps address those issues as well.
Up the road in Fielding, Manawatu District Mayor Helen Warboys says they've been planning for the influx of new people. She says the town centre has been spruced up and they're now looking to earthquake-strengthened buildings.
The opportunity I see is that given there are a number of big projects across the wider region, this is an opportunity for our construction and our commercial builders to be looking at the Manawatu as the place to invest in.
A major transport hurdle for the region is the Manawatu Gorge, which has been shut because of slips. A new road is due to be completed by 2024, a similar timeframe to the Ohakea Banks development. The Palmerston North Mayor, Grant Smith, says that's a lot of infrastructure work, but he believes it can be done, especially with many local tradies.
It'd be fair to say there will need to be some expert people brought in, and I mean you've seen that with other big build projects at Kaikoura and Transmission Gully, where there is some skill sets that are needed to be brought in, and I'm sure that in an immigration sense we will need to do some of that here as well.
He says now is the best time to invest in the region, and he's been chatting with developers about building more houses to meet demand.
We do have some housing shortages like all cities. But look, as I said, we're scaling up. These projects will be multi-year projects, so we just got to keep chipping away.
The Defence Force could not break down the specific costs of the construction, but the documents say the base development is expected to start from next year. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
And just enough time for some more of your feedback on the e-scooters, particularly in Auckland. Martin, thanks for your detailed email. He says that some of the rules around these scooters are absolutely daft and inconsistent from a road safety perspective. He says no helmet required on a scooter, but you need one as a cyclist. And he says that pedestrians should be allowed to use the footpath without having to worry about dodging these obstacles, especially the elderly and disabled, he said, and the people who are vision impaired. In terms of education, Martin reckons young males are too attached to the thrill to listen to the education campaign. Thank you for all your feedback today. Mary did want to know if the scooter companies are paying the council for the trial. Yes, they are. They won't tell us exactly how much. Several $1,000s, we understand. Thank you for listening or watching. We appreciate you spending your evening with us, and I will catch you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Regional Development Minister Shane Jones says the country's major banks are not off the hook just because a review has cleared them of serious misconduct. A Christchurch doctor says she's disturbed women are illegally importing abortion medicines they bought online. Auckland's mayor wants e-scooters on footpaths to face tighter speed restrictions. And in the face of soaring Wellington house prices, the capital's mayor says he's committed to making sure more homes in the city are affordable. Our next news and weather at 7.
This week on Are We There Yet?
You do get things thrown at you occasionally in anger. I don't have to listen to you, you're not my mother.
Adopting a child into your family.
It's a long process, but if it works, it's a worthwhile process.
How to help that child build a strong sense of self.
Where possible, children need to learn about where they came from and what stories surround them.
Are We There Yet with